The night air at the Naval Torpedo Station in Newport, Rhode Island, carried the cold bite of the Atlantic when the telegram arrived at 23:47 on a Tuesday in 1943. It was short, crackling, and brutal. 15 torpedoes hit, none exploded. No names, no condolences, just statistics shaped like gravestones. In the drafting room, lit only by a yellow desk lamp and the pulse of an oscillating fan, a 23-year-old ordnance mathematician froze over her slide rule. The message lay beside her like a wound. She had never seen the faces of those sailors, but she understood with terrifying clarity that each miscalculated depth setting, each mistuned magnetic coil, each underestimated impact angle was not just an error, it was blood. Outside, a cargo plane thudded onto the wet runway, wheels hissing through salt spray. Its fuselage bore the dull stains of seawater and diesel, carrying back what the Navy called recovered personnel. Men who had trusted their Mark 14 torpedoes to detonate when steel met steel. Some came home on stretchers. Others didn't come home at all. She imagined the moment of impact, a submarine creeping beneath an enemy convoy, the captain whispering, "Fire," the crew holding their breath. Then nothing but a hollow thud like a fist striking a coffin. She set the telegram beside her calculations, depth curves, trigger timing charts, testing data that never matched battlefield reality. Her fingers grazed the slide rule, ivory, brass cursor, markings worn from months of sleepless verification cycles. She had always loved the precision of numbers, but tonight, numbers felt like confessions. She whispered to herself, "Somewhere out there, someone died because this doesn't add up." It was the kind of admission no official report would ever contain. At 0012, she pulled another folder toward her. Buord test report drafts, heavily censored, the margins blackened with redacted failures. She flipped through charts showing torpedoes diving 10 feet deeper than their settings, magnetic exploders detonating early, contact pistons shearing sideways on angled impact. 3 different faults, 3 different nightmares. And yet the investigations insisted on treating them separately, like 3 small leaks instead of one flooding hull. Her breath misted the cold air. The lamp hummed. Somewhere, far down the corridor, she heard the faint clang of metal as engineers reset instruments for another round of testing at dawn. For a moment, she pressed her palm against the cool glass of the window, staring at the Atlantic in darkness. No explosions, no flares, only the faint reflection of her own face. Tired, worried, framed by the relentless glow of the desk lamp. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Tonight, the war felt closer than ever, and the slide rule in her hand no longer seemed like a tool, but a lifeline. By sunrise, the telegram's ink had dried, but its meaning had only sharpened. The Mark 14 torpedo, the Navy's primary submarine weapon since 1931, was failing at a scale no one in authority wanted to acknowledge. To most officers, the failures were operational anomalies. To her, they were mathematical screams. She sat before stacked binders of data the fleet had quietly sent back from the Pacific. Depth run logs, dud impact sketches, and damage reports where skippers swore they saw perfect hits with 0 detonations. She began with the depth problem. According to factory certification, a Mark 14 set to run at 10 feet should remain within a narrow vertical margin. But Buord's own classified hydrodynamic tests, the ones she had spent months recalculating, revealed torpedoes diving 20, even 22 feet beneath their intended path. Worse, the error increased with speed. A submarine captain might believe he was firing beneath a destroyer's keel, Yet the weapon was passing uselessly through cold green water far below. Next came the magnetic influence exploder, the device designed to trigger when a torpedo crossed under a ship's magnetic field. In the laboratory, it behaved obediently. At sea, it acted like a nervous animal, slight roll, a surge of current, a temperature shift. Any of these could spark premature detonation. She reviewed a chart from July 1943. 38% of magnetic exploders across 2 fleets had detonated before reaching their targets. Then, the third fault, the one no one wanted to discuss. The contact exploder's firing pin, meant to shear forward when the torpedo struck a target, jammed during oblique impacts. The steel was too brittle, the frame too tight. On angled hits, the most common in real combat, the pin bent sideways instead of forward. A perfect strike could become a silent thud. She wrote in her notebook, 3 failures, 3 vectors, all interacting. Why is the evaluation separate? It was the question that made senior engineers shift in their chairs. The Navy treated each flaw as an isolated inconvenience. Her calculations suggested a more frightening truth. The 3 faults amplified each other. A torpedo running too deep approached its target at the wrong angle. The wrong angle activated the magnetic coil early. If the coil didn't detonate prematurely, the impact pin jammed. The Mark 14 wasn't broken in one way. It was broken in 3 ways simultaneously, forming a deadly chain reaction of dysfunction. She stared at the Buord test report drafts from early 1943, the ones with neat tables and calm language. None mentioned the compounding effect of the failures. None matched what the submarine captains were writing in their logs in raw, furious handwriting. A page caught her eye, a handwritten note from a fleet skipper in the Solomons. How many times must we hit the enemy before Washington believes us? She exhaled slowly. Someone needed to believe them. Someone needed to look at all 3 failures together, not in silos, not in committee language, but through the cold clarity of physics and mathematics. And in that moment, she realized that if she didn't do it, no one would. For 8 months, she had lived inside the numbers, force diagrams, stress curves, resonant frequencies. Yet the 3 failures of the Mark 14 remained like 3 dark rooms separated by locked doors. On the morning after the telegram, she stared at a fresh sheet of drafting paper, the kind she usually saved for final diagrams. Instead, she drew a torpedo in cross-section. Not the clean blueprint version, but the real thing. Vibrating metal, erratic roll, shifting buoyancy, the chaotic physics of a weapon traveling 46 knots underwater. She drew again, this time highlighting the thin brass spring inside the contact exploder. It was trivial, almost decorative, the kind of component no one noticed, but she kept circling it. Something about its angle troubled her. While reviewing filmed impact tests, she had noticed a tiny, almost imperceptible flutter in the frame just before the firing pin jammed. She replayed the footage until the projector bulb warmed the room. That flutter matched a small spike she had seen months earlier in a vibration frequency chart, a chart everyone else dismissed. At 09:14, she reached for her slide rule, its notches polished from long nights and nervous adjustments. Slide rules did not give perfect answers. They revealed relationships, how one variable breathed when another shifted. She adjusted the cursor, calculating the oscillation period between the firing pin assembly and the magnetic coil armature. 2 different flaws, 2 different systems, yet the numbers aligned in a way she had never considered. A shared resonance, an invisible handshake between failures. She murmured, "It's not the explosion, it's the movement before the explosion." Her pencil raced across the drafting paper. What if the brass spring's angle amplified the sideways shear during an angled hit? What if the magnetic exploder's early detonation timing was worsened, not by the coil alone, but by the torsion in that same pin assembly? What if, instead of fixing three problems separately, altering one mechanical angle could calm all three? It was a wild idea, the kind that ruined careers. She grabbed a pocket watch from her desk, a gift from an older engineer who had told her, half joking, "If you can fix a torpedo, you can fix time." She opened the watch and used its brass lid as a stand-in for a steel target plate. Then she took a pencil and tapped it against the improvised surface to observe the micro-angle of rebound. She adjusted the pencil's tilt by 4 degrees, the exact offset from her calculations. The simulated impact behaved differently. The pencil glided instead of catching. She froze. Could it truly be that small? 4 degrees? In her notebook, she wrote the sentence that would later appear, dog-eared and smudged, in a photocopy of Ordnance Memo number 6471. If the spring angle changes by 4 degrees, the shear pin won't deform. She closed the watch. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the rare electric certainty of discovery, the kind that arrives only once in a lifetime, often in silence. But when she carried her equations to the senior engineers, the room stiffened. One man glanced at the paper, then at her, and said, "You're trying to solve problems we've already solved." She didn't reply. The math spoke louder than their pride. Still, she knew what this meant. If she wanted the truth tested, she would have to take the next step alone. She waited until the drafting room emptied, until the last set of heels clicked down the hallway, until the elevator cage rattled its way to the lobby, until even the night shift machinists stopped arguing over coffee in the stairwell. Silence settled over the Naval Torpedo Station like a lid. Only then did she unlock the storage drawer marked Test Components. Authorized personnel only. Technically, she was authorized personnel, but not for what she was about to do. Inside the drawer lay a row of contact exploders, each tagged with grease pencil numbers. She selected one from the mid-range batch, Unit 14, because it matched the same month, same machining batch, and same steel tempering series that had failed so catastrophically in the field. She placed it under the lamp and pulled out her calipers. The brass spring glinted as if it knew what was coming. The door eased open without warning. A senior engineer, Lieutenant Harold Dempsey, leaned against the frame with a frown carved by years of dismissing submarine captains' complaints. "You do realize," he said, "changing that without clearance could put you in front of a court of inquiry." She continued adjusting the spring, her hands steady. "If I'm wrong, I'll face the board." "And if you're right?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Then men will stop dying for reasons we could have fixed months ago." Dempsey hesitated a long second. Then he stepped back and closed the door without another word. At 23:06, she turned the spring exactly 4 degrees, a movement nearly invisible to the eye, but seismic to the machine. She painted a tiny red dot on the casing near the adjustment screw, a signature, not her name, just a mark that meant someone cared enough to try. She labeled it quietly, 14R, R for revised, R for risk, R for reckoning. The next morning, while the officers drank their weak mess coffee and argued over weather reports, she slipped the modified exploder into the testing queue at Narragansett Bay. On paper, it was indistinguishable from the others. In reality, it was the only torpedo on the slipway whose physics had been rewritten by a woman working alone under a yellow lamp. At 09:22, the test craft deployed it. The torpedo knifed through the water, leaving a thin silver trail as the range observers watched through binoculars. A perfect straight run, no premature detonation, no depth anomaly. It struck the target barge at an angle that had caused dozens of duds throughout 1942 and early 1943. For half a second, silence. Then the explosion tore through the bay, a blooming roar of white spray and black smoke. The shockwave hit the observation platform so hard that 2 officers grabbed the railing. But no one cheered, no one spoke. The sound was too heavy, too final. It was the sound of a truth the Navy had avoided for years. A commander lowered his binoculars, his jaw tightened. He knew the implications. If this unit worked, the others could have worked too, if they had listened sooner. She stood at the edge of the platform, hands clasped behind her back. She felt nothing like triumph, only relief, and the faint, rising fear of what would come next. The results would force questions. Questions would force blame. And blame in wartime rarely fell upward. The test report reached Pearl Harbor faster than anyone expected. Within 9 days, a courier placed the results on the desk of Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of U.S. submarine forces in the Pacific, a man already furious after months of torpedoes failing his crews. He read the summary twice, then 3 times, trying to understand how a single modified exploder, altered by 4 degrees, had succeeded where thousands had failed. By October 1943, Lockwood issued orders that were blunt, sweeping, and overdue. All Mark 14 contact exploders were to be reconfigured to the new spring angle specification immediately. It was the closest the Navy ever came to admitting the weapon had been dangerously flawed from the start. On the factory floor in Newport, she watched as machinists retooled jigs and adjusted gauges. Her design, her math, whispered through the building in the form of new tolerances, new cut angles, new calibrations. She was never mentioned by name, but her numbers traveled on every clipboard. The impact was immediate. Within 3 months, the Pacific submarine fleet reported the highest detonation reliability ever recorded. Patrol logs from USS Seahorse, USS Wahoo, and USS Tynosa listed torpedo performance not with bitterness, but with astonishment. All 5 detonated. 3 for 3. Explosion exactly on contact. Operations officers ran the statistics. Detonation success rose from barely 20 to 25% in some areas to 97% in early 1944. The average number of ships sunk per patrol nearly doubled. Japanese merchant tonnage losses climbed so sharply that naval planners in Tokyo called it the silent catastrophe, all because of 4 degrees. Yet she remained unseen within the machine. In meetings, senior engineers referred to the correction as the revised contact adjustment or the permissible spring modification. The machinists had another phrase for it, muttered with the mix of admiration and disbelief found only on factory floors. The woman's fix. She heard it once in passing, 2 torpedomen from the test wharf chuckling quietly as they loaded crates. One said, "Whoever she is, she saved a lot of boats." The other shrugged. "Maybe that's why they won't put her name on anything." But the transformation reaching across the Pacific was impossible to ignore. On the submarine Guardfish, a petty officer recorded in his patrol notes, "The torpedo ran true. We trusted it. For the first time, we trusted it." Trust. That fragile, invisible armor had returned. She wished she could tell the sailors what had changed. Wished she could stand on a pier at Pearl Harbor and say, "You are safer now. Your weapon works. Go hunt and come home alive." But she remained in her windowless office, sharpening pencils, recalculating tolerances, listening to the radio hum news of distant victories shaped by men who would never know her name. Before heading home one night, she paused over a map of the Pacific pinned to the wall. Small red flags marked ships sunk in recent months. She traced a line between them with her fingertip, imagining the submarines that fired the shots. The tension in their torpedo rooms, the breath held before detonation, the exhale when the explosion echoed through steel. She whispered, not proudly but quietly, "It held." And then she wondered, not for the first time, whether anyone would ever know why. Recognition did not arrive. Silence did. A silence so official and so thorough, it felt engineered. One morning, she was summoned to a small conference room on the 3rd floor, where 3 officers in freshly pressed khaki waited with a folder that bore no name, no label, no trace of authorship. They did not sit. They did not invite her to sit. One of them spoke with the clipped tone of someone reciting a rehearsed line. The Bureau has agreed that unauthorized individual contributions will not be disclosed in fleet documentation. Unauthorized individual contributions. The phrase landed like a verdict. She asked calmly, "Does that include the contact exploder revision?" A second officer replied, "The correction will be integrated as standard procedure. The origin is immaterial." Immaterial. A word that erased months of calculations, sleepless nights, and the moral weight of knowing that men had died waiting for someone to see what she saw. Later that week, she reviewed the updated technical report. Her handwritten proofs were absent. Her draft diagrams were replaced with official drawings. Even the tiny red dot she had painted on the prototype, her quiet signature, was untouched in the physical unit but omitted from photographs. She had expected anonymity. She had not expected erasure. In the cafeteria, she overheard a lieutenant whispering to another, "Can't publicize that a civilian woman solved the Navy's torpedo debacle. It'll embarrass half the engineering corps." The other man grunted in agreement. Bad for morale, bad for the chain of command. But on the submarine tenders in Pearl Harbor, the Holland, the Bushnell, the Griffin, torpedomen were talking too. In low voices over bitter coffee and chipped enamel mugs, they repeated a rumor carried from machinist to machinist, from test station to test station. Someone back in Newport had finally cracked the Mark 14. Someone nobody would name. Someone who got it right when the rest of the Navy got it wrong. She imagined those men loading torpedoes in the tropical heat, palms sweating on steel cylinders that they finally trusted not to betray them. She imagined the red battle lights, the whispered firing commands, the sternroom crews bracing for the jolt of a clean launch. Their safety had increased because of her numbers. That truth mattered more than signatures. But truth carries weight, and weight wears on the spirit. On a rainy night in November 1943, she sat alone in the empty drafting room, the echo of rain tapping against the window like a hesitant visitor. She reached into her desk and removed 2 objects, her slide rule and the small slip of paper where she had first written the equation that changed everything. She folded the paper carefully, almost ceremonially, and tucked it inside the leather case of the rule. These 2 items were the only evidence of her role, and she kept them not for pride, but because she feared the day when she might doubt herself if she had nothing solid to hold. Before leaving, she asked herself a question, one I now ask you, the viewer. Do you think history should honor those who stay silent, or only those who are acknowledged? Tell me in the comments. I want to know what you believe. She switched off the lamp. The room went dark, but the work she had done continued across an ocean, hidden inside steel and seawater. 50 years passed before anyone touched the box again. It sat on a basement shelf in the Naval Undersea Museum in Keyport, Washington, a plain cardboard cube with aging tape and a fading inventory tag misfiled sometime in the early 1970s. A new curator, cataloging neglected artifacts for a Cold War exhibit, opened it expecting to find redundant manuals or broken training models. Instead, he lifted out a leather case, stiff with age. Inside lay a slide rule, ivory body, brass cursor, edges worn by a precise, disciplined hand. There was something else, a folded scrap of yellowed paper pressed flat by decades of silence. He opened it gently. A formula appeared in black fountain pen ink, the notation crisp and confident despite the years. Beneath it, in small handwriting, AUG 1943, for accuracy, adjust by 4 degrees. He frowned. 4 degrees. It stirred a memory from an oral history interview he had conducted the year before with a retired torpedo man, a survivor of the submarine Silversides. The old sailor had laughed softly as he described the moment the Mark 14 finally became reliable. Someone back home fixed it. Don't know who, never knew. But whoever she was, we owed her every patrol we came home from. The curator turned the slide rule over. Faintly scratched into the back, almost invisible unless the light hit just right, were 2 words: accuracy saves lives. No signature, only initials carved with a hesitant hand, EM. He tried to match them to archival rosters. Most engineering records from the 1940s listed women only as civilian assistants, with initials instead of names. Personnel memos had been lost, shredded, or buried in classification. But a few training reports mentioned an EM assigned to torpedo data verification. One line, barely legible, noted her transfer in late 1943 due to workload reassignment. Nothing more. The curator stood in the storage room for a long moment, the hum of fluorescent lights blending with the distant sound of rain against the museum roof. He felt the quiet weight of an untold story resting in his palm. This slide rule had shaped a war. These numbers had saved ships. These initials had stood alone against failure and bureaucracy and the stubbornness of men who would never know her name. He placed the artifact beside the display mock-up of a Mark 14 exploder. Visitors would walk past it without understanding the magnitude of the object, unless they paused to read the small placard he drafted that evening. Recovered tools, Torpedo Station, Newport, 1943. Believed to belong to a civilian mathematician involved in critical revisions to the Mark 14 contact exploder. Her identity is unconfirmed. He hesitated before typing the last sentence, a whisper of recognition offered across half a century. The initials EM appear on the reverse, along with the inscription, "Accuracy saves lives." After the museum closed that night, he remained alone in the hall, listening to the faint echo of recorded submarine engines from a nearby display. Somewhere out on the dark Pacific, decades earlier, a submarine crew had loaded a torpedo that would finally detonate. And deep inside that sound, the pressure, the steel, the detonation wave, lived the echo of her calculation. No medals, no ceremony, only a preserved tool, a fading inscription, and the truth that history's sharpest corrections often come from hands the world never sees. The war ended long ago, yet some stories do not settle into history. They continue drifting like faint sonar echoes beneath deep water, waiting for someone patient enough to listen. Her story is one of them. It does not roar like a famous battle or blaze like a decorated victory. It moves quietly, carried by the steady rhythm of a slide rule, by the pressure of fingers guiding a brass cursor, by the certainty that mathematics could keep men alive even when bureaucracy refused to see the danger. She never learned the names of the sailors whose lives were shaped by her 4-degree correction. She never saw the submarines return to Pearl Harbor with their decks glistening under island sun, crews lined up and exhausted but alive. She never heard the laughter on the dock when a torpedo man slapped the casing of a Mark 14 and said, "Now this thing works," without knowing her calculations were sealed inside it. She never stood in the briefing rooms where commanders traced rising success rates on charts, unaware they were following the curve drawn by her pencil. And she never knew that in faraway homes, in Kansas, in Ohio, in tiny towns along the Mississippi, families embraced sons who survived patrols that would have ended differently if the torpedo had remained flawed. History often remembers the men who fired the weapons, not the minds that corrected them. It remembers the roar of victory, not the long nights under weak yellow lamps where someone quietly refused to accept failure as an answer. But when the curator found her slide rule decades later, when he read the inscription she had etched into the ivory, "Accuracy saves lives," a small part of the world shifted back into alignment. The forgotten became visible again, not through applause or monuments, but through the simple act of recognition. And maybe that is the truest legacy, the enduring reminder that even in vast, chaotic wars, individual clarity matters. A single angle matters. A hidden correction matters. A woman working alone in a quiet room can alter the trajectory of ships, patrols, and futures simply by refusing to let the numbers remain wrong. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear it. The faint click of her slide rule, the whispered breath before a breakthrough, the soft murmur of conviction that carried her through every unseen night. It lingers in the museum light. It lingers in the Pacific silence. It lingers in the memory of every patrol that came home.